Welcome into Fielding the 68 presented by Rhythm. Paul Fritschner alongside Brad Wachtel and Rocco Miller. It is a Friday before Selection Sunday. It is one of the best days of the college basketball season, fellows. There is no doubt about it. There are games all up and down the slate over the next 5 or 6 hours. I'm about to head over to Madison Square Garden. You might hear some of the sirens here from New York City throughout the next hour outside my hotel room. But Rocco and Brad, we're going to break everything down for you as far as bubble teams go, because there is a lot to talk about from teams that are right on the cut line. And we have 12 teams over the next 60 minutes that we are going to break down who's in, who's out, who still has work to do, and who should feel good going into Selection Sunday. But Brad and Rocco, I have Texas and Tennessee on the screen next to me. 16:08 left in this game. Tennessee up by 5. That's obviously one we're going to keep an eye on, but there is so much that we are looking at as we get through this day. Brad, I'll start with you. How are things going with you before Selection Sunday? About 49 hours until a bracket is released.
Things are going great. There's total chaos on the bubble. And if you're a bracketologist, you should love that. Nobody wants things easy. If you're a fan of one of those teams, it's obviously excruciating. But every time there's a game being played, our heads are spinning, trying to figure out what happens if this team wins, what happens if this team loses. So there are so many different ways that this bracket could turn out. And it's really exciting. And I can't wait to see how it all turns out.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I think every time I've tweeted about bracketology in the last 48 hours, I keep coming back to, all right, are Brad and Rocco going to judge me on what I put out? Is what I put out accurate? And today we get to find out. Rocco, how are you? How's the week been treating you as we lead into Selection Sunday?
Well, here it's 2 p.m. Pacific time in Northern California. I returned home very late from Vegas last night. Feels good to get some normalcy. It's impossible to go to bed on time or even go to bed in Vegas. So had a great week, saw a lot of teams, talked to a lot of people. It's ground zero for championship week, but now it's really time to lock in. This room you see me in now, I'll probably be in here almost all 49 of those hours you talked about, making sure the forecast is spot on where it needs to be. And again, Brad said it beautifully. The bubble is a little more chaotic than usual, in my opinion. There's just more of a exclusion standpoint. I just think there's a bigger list of teams that you can exclude if you actually had to. Now, I think the good news for those bubble teams, Paul, is that so far they've avoided any bid steals. Memphis had a close call today. They survived to the semifinal. So we'll see if Memphis can get 2 more wins. That's obviously the most easy target to look at. But I think you have the Mountain West. If you can get Utah State and New Mexico to win today, I think that's going to be a big helper for the bubble. And, of course, we have a few other scenarios. North Carolina might just go out and win the whole ACC tournament. So we'll see where we fall. But I think, by and large, there's a lot of teams at risk.
All right, so here is what we have to talk about today, because it is going to be a packed show. We have Indiana, we have Texas, Boise State, Colorado State, UNC, UC Irvine, Xavier, San Diego State, Arkansas, West Virginia, Ohio State, and Vanderbilt. We are going to break down over the next 60 minutes all 12 of those teams and where they stand going into Selection Sunday. But we are going to start with the Hoosiers of Indiana. And Rocco, I will turn to you for an Indiana team that lost the other day to Oregon and now has to have a long wait until Selection Sunday to hear whether they are called and are going to be placed into the NCAA tournament. Where do you think the Hoosiers stand right now?
So, yeah, I have Indiana as my very last team in the field. I think from a selection standpoint, they were second to last. So to me, they're one of those last two hanging on. And the reason why is the reason we're even talking about Indiana right now is the road win at Michigan State. The committee has told us for probably almost our entire lives. It comes down to for making sure you get the decisions correct on which teams belong in or out. Where did you play? Who did you play? And how did you do? Well, that win at Michigan State is so critical for the bubble. They also threw in 3 other non-tournament wins that are also substantial. 2 of those other 3 landed in quad 1, the win at Ohio State and the win at Penn State. And then they added a win at Washington in quad 2. So they've done enough away from home, I guess, based on just the power of that Michigan State win. Michigan State is 7th on the seed list. I think we're all unanimous on that. It's just a really, really good road win. But the rest of the results are very shaky, and it's all the losses are right there in the first quad. I think that helps the Hoosiers a little bit just because there's no bad losses. But at 4-13, it's a pretty lousy winning percentage. 17 opportunities, only succeeding and smiling 4 times, and in those 4 wins as well, with the exception of the 15-point win over Purdue. They really had to squeak those out. There was a 1-point win at Ohio State in overtime, 4-point win at the Michigan State in the big win, and a 6-point win at Penn State. So, they're within the final scores themselves. It's tricky with Indiana because they also got blown out a number of times. You look at that home loss to Illinois, really, really ugly. So, again, there's plenty of reasons to leave them out, but they have just enough to get in for right now.
Brad, your thoughts on the Hoosiers?
Yeah, Rocco put it really nicely. I think that win at Michigan State is the only reason why they're hanging around right now. And Michigan State has been one of the hottest teams in the country as a solid 2 seed at the moment. Another thing that kind of goes against Indiana, they're currently my last team in the field. They're just 8-13 against Quadrant 1 and Quadrant 2 opponents. 5 games under 500 is not a good record, and they're just 5-9 away from home. Some things that I think they do have going for them, though, their resume metrics are pretty solid for a team that's on the bubble. They have a 48 strength record, a 46 WOB, and their KPI is 35. So you take those averages, and their numbers are pretty favorable compared to a lot of these other teams on the bubble. So they are right there for a bid. If they happen to get in, they're going to be in Dayton based on their Nets 54, which is one of the worst in the field right now. It's actually the worst in the field. And the rest of their predictive metrics are, kind of close around 50 and above. But look, 4-13 is not a particularly good record. We saw last year Oklahoma did not make the tournament. I know there were 5 bid stealers. Oklahoma missed the tournament while being 4-12 against Quadrant 1 opponents. So Indiana's hanging on for dear life. And the problem with their resume as well, they beat Ohio State twice at home and on the road. And right now, Ohio State in all likelihood, they're not going to be in the NCAA tournament. So now all of a sudden, Indiana only has 2 wins against at-large teams at Michigan State, and they beat Purdue. So that's a pretty significant problem as well. But having that road win is a major piece of their resume that does and will stand out to the committee.
All right, so Indiana, we've checked the box on Indiana there as we get into the weekend. Now let's talk about Texas. Right now I'm looking at the TV. Texas up 10 with 13:47 to go in the SEC quarters. Tennessee up 10. Did I say Texas was up 10? Tennessee up 10 in the SEC quarters there. Yeah, don't worry. Tennessee up 10 in the SEC quarters there in Nashville. Is this a game, fellas? I want to ask you about the importance here of conference tournament week, because I think that's something that we go back and forth on as a college basketball public of how much importance do we put on conference tournament week, where Texas has a good week in the SEC tournament, but we remember what happened with Texas A&M back in 2022. It's this delicate balance of what do we do with all of these wins during conference tournament week. And right now, Texas down 10 to Tennessee. If they are to come back and win this game, that would obviously put them in a better position. But Brad, where do you see Texas in this game? And if they aren't able to come back, where do they sit with a loss here to Tennessee to end their chances?
I think they're right on the cut line with the loss. With a win in this game, I don't see how you don't put them in the field. They're 7-10 against Quadrant 1 opponents before this game. 7 wins. Just you start comparing them to other bubble teams. Indiana, as we mentioned, has 4. Xavier has 2. North Carolina has 1. Boise State right now has 2. It's really not even close, and I know they have more opportunities, but 7-10 is not. It's not like they're 7-15, 7-16. 7-10 is not a bad record. The problem on their side, they're just 10-14 against Q1 and Q2 opponents. and just 12-14. And with this loss, if they end up losing, they'll just be 12-15 against Q1 through Q3, which is a bit of an issue. Anytime you're under 500 and being 3 games under 500, plus having 15 losses on the season is going to be an issue in the minds of the committee. Now, as the committee always says, every game is treated equally. These tournament games, it's treated like just another game. You don't get extra credit for winning a tournament game, but they do matter. How do they matter enough, though? And I think heading into the SEC tournament, Texas did not do enough. I think that was pretty clear. In the SEC tournament, they picked up wins over Vanderbilt, which is a good win, and Texas A&M on a neutral court, obviously, which is a solid win as well. I think they're right there on the cut line. I think it's going to depend how the other bubble teams do. It's going to be tough because you start looking at the things that are negative on their resume. They had a terrible non-conference strength of schedule. Their resume metrics right now are slightly worse than many of these other bubble teams. So like when you're comparing teams like a Texas and a North Carolina, it's difficult because one team has a ton of quad one wins, one team has a much stronger resume metrics overall, and they're better from Q1 to Q3 by a large margin, while the other team is much better against quadrant one teams by a large margin. So it comes down to what the committee is going to favor. But one thing that always sticks in your mind is, who have you beaten? I think that's something that we have to keep remembering. Who have you beaten? I don't think you just get into the NCAA tournament by beating nobody, especially when you've had a ton of opportunities. So again, with a win, I think Texas will be in. With a loss, they're right on the cut line, and we have to see how everything else unfolds, plus bid stealers, to see how it all turns out.
Yeah, Rocco, I think that's an interesting point about how this whole week is playing out, right, with Texas. And you're looking at this game right now and you're trying to value, okay, going into Saturday, and when did these teams get voted in, right? They start voting teams into the tournament. The committee gets together in their room in Indianapolis, and then they start putting teams in. And now here we are sitting here on Friday night at 5:12 Eastern time. Is Texas in a position here where if they beat Tennessee right now with 13 and a half to go, down 10, if they can rally here to win this game, do you feel like, Rocco, this is a Texas team that will be in the NCAA tournament?
I'm not sure. I actually think they have to win this game even to be really considered, because history is not on their side whatsoever, based on the fact that, a few years ago, we saw with Colin Sexton, actually, that Alabama team had 15 losses, and that team had beaten, I think, multiple number one seeds, certainly multiple teams at the top of the board. You also saw that happen with Vanderbilt around that same time frame. So I don't have the year written down. I didn't know I was going to go here, but those are two examples of 15 loss teams that made it in because they had something extraordinary on the resume. They beat a 1 seed, they beat a 2 seed. Well, right now Texas has that chance. They're playing a top 6 team in Tennessee. They don't have a win. Their best win's Kentucky, but it's at home, so it wouldn't have mattered for this example anyway. A home win's a home win. So getting a win against a top of the board team away from home is required in my view. If you have a sub 500 record in all the important areas, and they're way under 500 still. They came into today 12-14. They lose today, they're 12-15. I think they're pretty far out still. I thought they were drawing dead entering the week, but I agree with Brad that these wins are helping. But it's just, the 7 wins in quad one are all tournament level wins, but 3 of those are home wins. 2 of them happened this week, and the road win at Mississippi State hasn't aged that well. Mississippi State for me has dropped to a 9 seed. It's just not the extraordinary thing to break history, what history's taught us, and let this team in. Their best non-conference win is St. Joseph's. That's not good for an SEC team. They scheduled terribly. They have the 285th worst schedule out of conference. And they went out of their way to play New Orleans, Chicago State, Arkansas Pine Bluff, and Mississippi Valley, 4 of the bottom 20 teams in the country. And they did that intentionally. So this is not the case where I think Texas gets it.
Okay. All right. Let's move on now to Boise State, who sits at 2-5 in quad 1. They're 5-2 in quad 2. They do have a quad 3 and a quad 4 loss on their resume. They pick up a win over San Diego State, a really impressive win last night in the Mountain West tournament. San Diego State didn't make a field goal, I think, fellas, for the last 9 minutes of the game, I think was the stat in that one. They didn't make a field goal there for the last 9 minutes. Boise State able to pick up a win, keep their season alive. But Rocco, going back to you on the Broncos, do you think the Boise State team, as it's constructed right now with their resume, is in a position to hear their name called when I come from that from where we talked last week about Mountain West teams building their resume within conference play. And I remember that was something that stuck out to me from what you said on last week's Fielding the 68. And now you start to see, okay, they beat San Diego State, but that's another win within the Mountain West. So how do you balance where Boise State is right now?
Yeah, I mean, that win yesterday certainly helped. They got swept by San Diego State in the regular season. So now they can at least tell the committee, hey, we can beat this team, and we did it in Vegas. So from that standpoint, I thought it was really helpful for the Broncos. I think it makes them much more interesting than they were before the game, obviously. And they do have that non-conference mix that at least something, like 2 in quad 1 that really matter, beating St. Mary's up in Idaho Falls, beating Clemson at home. Even getting Clemson to come up there was a minor miracle. But I think the problem is going back to that original thing that they'll probably keep bringing up. Who did you play? Where did you play? How did you do? They didn't really go away from Idaho and get big wins. They went down to the Paradise Jam. They almost lost to South Dakota State, won that game by 1 point. Then, of course, lose to Boston College in the championship game. That really, really hurt. Obviously, BC had a bad year. That's in quad 4 as we have this discussion. They actually had a game over in Spokane against Washington State. They lose. Washington State fell apart later in the year. That's now in quad 3. And so when you just break it down, you're trying to outweigh some of that bad. And I think the final punch was losing at home to Colorado State to end the regular season by 10, a team that they're competing with for a bubble spot. So just knowing the history of how the Mountain West usually gets looked at and knowing that Boise State's probably just a tad bit short, I think that's their challenge. But I think their case to get in is the win over St. Mary's, win over Clemson, adding wins against Utah State and New Mexico at home, and now yesterday's win against San Diego State. They have a good collection of wins above the bubble versus some of these other teams we'll talk about. And I just think that makes them very close. I think at the end, they're going to get probably just left out if they're in that large team. The good news is, Paul, they're still playing basketball. So a chance to beat New Mexico today, obviously that would help tremendously. And then you're just one win away from winning it all. So Broncos fans should keep their chins up for now.
Brad, your thoughts on the Broncos?
Yeah, like you mentioned, I think playing those non-conference games, having those wins, and having a diverse resume certainly helps. And I know, like Rocco mentioned, not playing enough games outside of the state of Idaho, but beating a team like Clemson, who is, has a chance to win the ACC tournament, is towards the top of the standings there, and St. Mary's, which is still technically a neutral court. I think if they can, they're going to need to beat New Mexico tonight. I really believe that. And I think if they do, they're going to be over 500 against quadrant 1 and 2 opponents. And you start looking at all the resumes and all the bubble teams and everything and differentiate, things to kind of separate teams from each other. And that's something that definitely stands out. Every other bubble team that we're going to be talking about is under 500. And I know Boise State has that quadrant 4 loss, which is a problem. And their metrics, their resume metrics are about in the mid-50s right now, which isn't quite where you want to be. But I think if they can beat New Mexico this evening, they have a real chance. I really do believe that. And, you beat them, why not just win the tournament and forget about everything else? But, they're still alive. And anytime you're still alive, you control your own destiny. And that's really all you could ask for.
All right, the last team we're going to talk about here in this first block, we're going to stay out in the Mountain West, and we're going to talk about Colorado State. And right now, Colorado State, they sit at 1-5 in quad 1. They're 7-2 in quad 2. They're 11-0 in quad 4, but they have the 2 quad 3 losses. If we're talking about the Mountain West and everything we just did in that conference, Does Colorado State have a chance here to hear their name called on Selection Sunday with what they've done so far this season, Brad?
I think it's a long shot. They are 8-7 against quadrant 1 and 2 opponents, which is a nice number, and not having a quadrant 4 loss, unlike Boise State, helps. But the problem is you start looking at who they beat. Their best win is at Boise State. So if we're not putting Boise State in the field, is that really considered how great of a win is that? I mean, it's definitely a good win, but is it good enough? They did beat Utah State as well, and they beat San Diego State, but those wins came at home. I don't think there's quite enough there, and the way the bracket worked out in the Mountain West, they get Utah State tonight, which would be a quality win. I don't think it's going to be quite enough to put them over the top. I think they're probably going to need to win the conference tournament in order to get a bid, but they're certainly still in play. Having the 2 quadrant 3 losses hurts. If they didn't have any bad losses, I would give them a much better opportunity. Their resume metrics are in the mid 50s, very similar to Boise State, but I just feel like they don't have the type of resume that Boise State has in terms of diversity and winning games in non-conference play and games away from home against teams that are bona fide tournament teams. So they're hanging around, but I don't think it's going to be quite enough if they don't win the Mountain West Conference tournament.
Rocco, your thoughts on Colorado State?
Yeah, I'm pretty much right there with Brad. He said it beautifully. I will give Colorado State credit. They were able to get a game with Ole Miss, a game with VCU. That would have been really huge. Unfortunately for the Rams, they lost both. They didn't play well down at Ole Miss. That was almost a road game. They played it in a suburb of Memphis on the Mississippi side of the border. But hey, if you're a Mountain West team, we talk about this all summer long in scheduling. You'll do anything you can to play the big boys. And I give the Rams credit for how they went about their schedule. They also got the TCU game down in Palm Springs. They won that, unfortunately, out of the Rams' control, but TCU did not end up being a team in the field. A few weeks ago, they were trying to fight in there, but now they're quite clearly out, and that win is now buried in Quad 2B, and it shows up as the best non-conference win for the Rams. And then you have to go all the way down to Quad 4 to find their second best non-conference win. That's a huge problem just by itself. I think it's Loyola Marymount at home. So again, there's your case study, Paul. You said it at the beginning of the Boise part where, if you build your resume within the Mountain West, it's historically been problematic. That's what I've noticed. We saw an extreme example of that last year with New Mexico needing to win the Mountain West tournament to get in. I had that validated by multiple committee members in last year's tournament. So again, I'm always just a little bit hesitant on the Mountain West. I love these teams. I mean, I was out there yesterday. I was talking to Aztec fans at the airport. We'll talk about them in a little bit. And so I totally get it. And here's the good news for Colorado State. They are the hottest team in the conference. They have a great bracket, in my opinion, to get this thing done. Utah State's a team that just blew out on March 1st. And so if they get that done today, they're one win away from cutting down the nets, and then they'll be an extremely dangerous 11 or 12 seed in the bracket straight in.
All right. So those are 4 teams that we've already talked about. We're going to talk about 4 more on the other side of this break. We have North Carolina, Xavier, UC Irvine, and San Diego State. That is on the other side of this right here. This is Fielding the 68, presented by Rhythm.
College basketball fans, are you ready to take your hoops game to a new level? Whether you're a seasoned bettor or just trying to win your March Madness office pool, Rhythm is here to give you the edge this season. With data-driven predictions for every single college basketball game left on the schedule, Rhythm helps you maximize your bets. And as March Madness kicks off, Rhythm's insights will help you spot those plucky Cinderellas that you know are going to shake up the NCAA tournament. But that's not all. When Selection Sunday rolls around, let Rhythm's AI-powered bracket generator do the heavy lifting for you. This is the same AI tool that performed 35% better than the average ESPN bracket last year. And here's the best part. Rhythm pairs perfectly with our Field of 68 expert analysis, giving you the 1-2 punch that you need for the rest of the college basketball season. So don't wait. Download Rhythm today and get ready to see college basketball and your betting results in a whole new light. I want my home to feel like my home. So whether I'm looking for big furniture, just a small piece for my place, or maybe some storage solutions for the basement or the garage, the answer is Wayfair. Seriously, I needed a new patio set and fire pit for my backyard. I bought it on Wayfair. It looks great on our deck, and it gives me an excuse to fire up the smoker, invite some friends over, crack a couple beers. Just last week, I bought a new chair for my office, someplace comfortable to sit while the madness takes up the 4 screens in front of me. I got it on Wayfair, clicked a few buttons. A couple days later, it showed up at my front door. They even offered to help set it up for you. Digging through online stores can be intimidating. Trust me, I know. It can be hard to find what you're looking for in your price range, but not on Wayfair. They have great options, even if you are balling on a budget like me. Wayfair has every style for every home, including mine and yours. So head to wayfair.com and shop everything home. That's WAYFAIR.com. Wayfair, every style, every home.
Welcome back to Fielding the 68, presented by Rhythm. Whether you're a seasoned bettor or aiming to dominate your college basketball betting, March Madness pool, NBA, golf, and more, Rhythm gives you the competitive edge. Don't wait. Download Rhythm today and transform how you bet, bracket, and enjoy college basketball. Paul Fritschner, Brad Wachtel, Rocco Miller, 2 of the GOATs with you here as we get through Bracketology on a Friday night before Selection Sunday. We are about 48 hours away from a bracket, and it is one of the most fun nights of the college basketball season. Personally, I will say, just before we get into these last 4 or this next 4 group of teams that we're going to talk about, Friday night at Madison Square Garden, there is absolutely nothing like it. And if you look, Doster tweeted out earlier today just the slate of games that we're about to have from 6:30 to 11 o'clock tonight. There is just, I'm telling you, it's cinema, what we are about to have over the next 5 hours, whether it's on the bubble or whether it's seating, whatever it is. There's just nothing like the next 5 hours of college basketball. All right, North Carolina. Let's start with them here in our second block. The Tar Heels right on the cusp, and I know there are a lot of North Carolina fans listening to this right now. Are they in? Are they out? Rocco, we'll start with you. What's the case for North Carolina? They have a huge game against Duke tonight. Cooper Flagg, obviously a massive question mark, and we remember last year what happened with Seton Hall, the committee talking about even that game against UConn with Donovan Clingan being out for just a half in that game. You talk about injuries and everything else that plays into this. Where does North Carolina sit as we head into this massive matchup with Duke tonight?
I mean, North Carolina, and it's a good thing you did that whole massive preview about how big tonight is. I don't think there's anything bigger in terms of bracketology than this North Carolina Duke game. As great as all those other matchups are going to be, this one really has significant impact on everybody else, because I do believe, and if Duke is down both starters tonight, I do believe a North Carolina win is going to be enough to get them in. It just is what it is. And I think Duke showed yesterday, Cooper Flagg went down. I think they were down by 9 when he got hurt. And Brown went down a little bit later, and then they ended up winning the game by 7 or 8. So they were a plus 16 or 17 without him. So I think, if anything, Duke showed how deep they can be, even if their stars are gone. And, they still have Knuppel and all those guys too. But they're a very loaded and deep team is my point. So I think the committee, if it's not full credit they'll get for this win tonight, it's almost full credit, I would say. And I think North Carolina's slowly been improving their profile. I totally understand all the knocks against the Tar Heels. 1-11 is really hard to look at and digest in the quad one. And I think, UCLA got blown out today. Last I saw, I don't know if they rallied, but that doesn't help because that's North Carolina's one win against the field. But I think all these other wins they've accumulated add up to something, and I think they've clearly been playing better basketball down the stretch. Again, that's not something on the team sheet, but I have had the opportunity to talk to a few different members of the committee over the last couple of weeks. And, like we were talking about off the air, we know the 2 guys who used to be part of the Big East or still are, the Georgetown athletic director and Stu Jackson of the WCC. We have actually some real basketball people on the committee. And I think in North Carolina's specific case, I think that's going to mean something. We all know who the chairman of the committee is as well. So if North Carolina plays a very competitive game tonight, falls short, I'm still not going to dismiss them due to all of that. and because of the name on the front of their chest. A lot of their losses at the top of that 1-11 are against the best of the best in college basketball. It would be 2 against Duke so far, could be 3. Auburn, Florida, Alabama, Michigan State. So there's, you give them a little bit of sympathy. They lost in overtime to Michigan State. And if you're watching the games, I mean, this team's a very high level skill team with NBA talent. So it's all that, right? At the end of the day, they're now 10-9 away from home, so at least they have a winning record away from home, and just 4-6 against the top 2 quads. But in all 4 of those in quad 2, best road win at Florida State. So yeah, there's lots to pick apart and but I just feel like with the wins above bubble metric, it's designed to kind of add these things up for us. They're sitting there right in the low 40s for being selected.
Brad, your thoughts on North Carolina?
Yeah, I mean, personally, having a 1-11 record against Quadrant 1 opponents is a significant issue. It's the total body of work, as the committee always says, and the one thing that stands out more than anything on North Carolina's resume are their metrics, their resume metrics. A 37 strength of record, 48 KPI, and a 42 WAP, which is very strong. I kind of compare, in a sense, North Carolina's resume to NC State from not last year, but from 2 years ago. NC State finished just 1-6 against Quadrant 1 opponents. So we have seen teams get in actually from that conference with only 1 Quadrant 1 victory. And their resume metrics were top 40, very similar to what North Carolina's were, and they only had 2 wins against the field. So look, I think every year is different. It's hard you're not comparing apples to apples, but I kind of wanted to go back and get a sense of, how many teams actually got at large bids with just 1 Quadrant 1 win. And it's not many, that's for sure. But I think, as Rocco said, I think if North Carolina can beat Duke tonight, I think there's a really good chance that they'll be in the field. And with the way their predictive metrics are, they could even potentially be out of Dayton based on, right now they're top 35 in all of KenPom, BPI, and T-Rank. So that wouldn't shock me either, especially, and even if they beat Duke and then go on to win the ACC tournament. So personally, which you can't have personal feelings involved when you're trying to figure out what the committee is going to do. Personally, I would not put them in, but I think they're right there. I think a win, and it's going to be hard to keep them out of the field. And even with a loss, their resume metrics are probably going to improve. So I have them out right now, but with Texas losing, and we'll see what happens with Boise State, they're right there on the cut line for me. And, having a strong record against Quadrant 1 through 3 opponents also is in their favor, which kind of does separate them from a lot of these other bubble teams as well.
All right, it's time to talk about Xavier. The Musketeers here entering today, picking up a quad 1 win overnight as UConn jumped up a couple spots to 29th in the net. So Xavier now with 2 quad 1 wins on the season. The KPI has been holding them back from a resume metrics perspective, but otherwise things have been right in flux with the Musketeers, whether it's on the cut line, whether it's the last 4 in, first 4 out, wherever it's been over the last couple of weeks. But for the most part, Xavier winning 7 straight here to close the season. That win against Creighton at home. They've done some work at home. They also have that win against Marquette on the road. They lose yesterday in the Big East quarterfinals to Marquette. All 3 games against Marquette decided by 2 points. A fun one yesterday at the Garden, but one that Xavier comes up on the short end of. So Rocco, I'm curious, as the Musketeers now have a long 48 hours of waiting and bubble watching and everything else heading into the selection show on Sunday at 6:00. What are the Musketeers' chances, and do they have any kind of breathing room here over the next 48 hours?
Yeah, I wouldn't call it breathing room at all because it's so razor thin between a few of these teams, whether it's Indiana, North Carolina. We'll talk about a few more later, but the committee really could have them in any order, depending on how their voting goes, right? I think, we go back to what we always start with, which is what'd you do away from home? And that win at Marquette is really carrying the resume. At least if you were going to beat Marquette once, you did it in the right building. I would say that it was more important than the game yesterday from a bracketology and forecasting standpoint because it's harder to do. And the reason why Xavier, for me, is above Indiana in the pecking order is because they have multiple results to back up that nice shiny road win, and that's the UConn and Creighton home win. So and UConn and Creighton are really solid 8 seeds in my forecast. And I think it's a little better than just beating up on bubble teams like, we see in some of these other profiles, especially the Mountain West ones, right? So I think that helps Xavier at least to a degree. You look at an Indiana team with just 2 wins against tournament level competition, and Xavier's got that third one. So again, we're splitting hairs on a lot of categories. Another really, and I don't know how much this will actually matter, but DePaul playing well in the Big East tournament helped Xavier a little bit because now DePaul road win is a quad 2. One of the things I always look at down to the cut line is top 2 quad road record. And you guys Xavier won at DePaul to get to 4-7, which is not a great record, but you have 4 wins to look at. And that actually ties the most of all the bubble teams I'm looking at. There's a bunch of others with 4, but there's a chunk with 3. There's a chunk with 2. There's even a team or 2 with 1. And so all of that matters. And then away from home, it's not a great record either. They finished 6-9. So you certainly have reasons to go ahead and rip Xavier out of the field once a couple bids get stolen. But I think for today, they're in one of those last couple spots. I would certainly get a refundable hotel in Dayton set up now before the mad dash begins between Xavier and Indiana fans. But that's where they're at, I think, Paul.
Okay, Brad, how about the Musketeers?
All right. So first of all, I don't see how you could how anybody could put North Carolina ahead of Xavier. I think Xavier has to be ahead of North Carolina in the pecking order, assuming Carolina loses to Duke tonight, of course. But right now, Xavier has more wins over the field. Their resume metrics are slightly worse, but not enough for it to be a significant difference. And another thing that stands out that may not seem like a big deal, but it is, Xavier does not have any bad losses. They're 12-0 against quadrant 3 and 4 opponents. Carolina does have the one loss. It's to Stanford. It's not really a terrible loss, but Stanford's 82 in the net, so it is considered a quadrant 3 loss. So I think that kind of separates them a little bit from North Carolina. Again, they're not playing anymore, which is a problem. But Xavier against the top 3 quadrants, they're 14-11. Carolina's 16-12. Slightly better, but not enough to kind of move them ahead. So I think Xavier is right there. They're going to need help. If there's 3-4 bid stealers, over the next couple days, they're going to have a major problem. I don't see them getting in if that happens. But if not, they have that. I think the win on the road against Marquette is significant, because not many teams have a win on the road against a bona fide at-large team. Indiana does have one, but Xavier does have more wins over the field than Indiana does. So I think that helps. Anytime you win on the road is significant. 2-9 record against Quadrant 1 does not look really pretty. But for now, they are in my field. And as Rocco said, book your hotel, but make sure that ticket is refundable.
Well, luckily for Xavier, Dayton's only a 45-minute drive up the road, so hopefully everybody's saving the funds there for Tuesday and Wednesday. We'll see, but yeah, I think it's going to be a long 48 hours as we watch. Right now Texas down 14 to Tennessee, and Memphis, of course, and then VCU in the A10. So we'll see what happens here over these next couple of days. But another team we want to talk about, UC Irvine. Quickly here on Irvine, does Irvine have a chance to get in as an at-large bid? Is the Big West a 2-bid league, Brad?
I think right now they're going to have to reach the championship game against UC San Diego and lose to UC San Diego to have a real shot. Comparing their resume, they're 1-0 against Q1A opponents. They're currently let's see, 4-2 against quad 1 and 2 opponents, but the problem is that they have 3 bad losses. Their non-conference strength of schedule wasn't particularly great, but the one thing that stands out on their resume is their wins away from home, and they lead the country with 17 wins away from home, which is something the committee will absolutely note. Their resume metrics are fairly solid. I mean, 54 strength of record, 36 KPI, strong, and a 50 WOB puts them, in the mix for sure. Their best win is at UC San Diego, and they don't have anything else, unfortunately. So you take a look at what their strengths are. The strengths are their wins away from home, their resume metrics, and of course that win at UC San Diego. Is that enough to put them over all of these other teams that have all these other opportunities and wins over, teams that are definitely going to be at large teams? I don't know if it's going to be enough, but they're still in play. And if it works out the way it works, they need it to work out. And, in an ideal situation, they win the Big West tournament. But if they happen to lose to UC San Diego, I think they're still certainly in the mix for an at-large bid.
All right. Rocco, Irvine.
Yeah, good summary by Brad. I always like to hear other people talk about them because I feel like I'm way too close to the situation. So that's great. And I think what they've been able to do is extraordinary. And that is why they're even being discussed. Just being 17-3 away from home is absolutely bonkers to me. This is a team, Paul, that has played games in every time zone. They've played in a different country. They got 3 of their wins away from home at Canada tournament that I called, and good quality competition for mid-major level. Towson won their league. Kennesaw State just played Liberty to the Horn in the CUSA semis, and you also had Kent State, one of the better teams in the MAC in that field. So those were all good wins. And then you see we know that they won in La Jolla. That gives them the juice necessary to be in the discussion. Quad 1A road win, a team above the cut line in the Tritons. But they backed that up with 3 other Quad 2 road wins that are tough places to win: Northern Iowa, Cal State Northridge, and Belmont. So, again, the quad system was built to try to capture some of this stuff, right? And I don't know what we're doing here if we're constantly dismissing these types of teams. What Irvine's done leads the country with 17 wins away from home, 14 wins on other campuses in America, easily leads the country as well. And so, yeah, and I think because they play the hottest team in the Big West tonight, Cal Poly, which isn't going to give them a lot of credit on the quad system, but Cal Poly is very dangerous tonight. They're not going to get much credit, or it won't really change anything in terms of getting in or out. So, yes, they do have to get to that championship game tomorrow. Obviously, if they lose, it needs to be UC San Diego, because if they end up playing UC Santa Barbara, who's in the other semifinal, that will be another quad 3 loss. So that's what's at stake. But I do think if the committee is digging in as much as I have on this team, and they understand the challenges, like the loss to Duquesne on the road, that was their 3rd road game of the week in a 3rd different time zone. I mean, nobody else even plays that kind of schedule in the bubble. So it's impossible to compare the challenges that this team has faced. They also lost 2 players in their rotation to torn ACLs and continued playing at this level. And I'm just beyond impressed by them, and I hope the committee agrees with me.
Last team to talk about in this segment, and the last Mountain West team that we have to talk about, is San Diego State, who lost yesterday to Boise State. So their opportunities to build a resume are done. They can't obviously win the Mountain West tournament anymore. Is there optimism in San Diego that the Aztecs hear their name called on Sunday, Rocco?
Well, if you asked the people at the airport last night, Paul, I would say no. They were all down and out. They thought they were done. I was the one that had to cheer them up. I had to remind them that they beat Houston and Creighton, Paul. And
look, there is nobody better in the world that I would want cheering me up if I needed some help on bracketology than if I ran into Rocco Miller in the airport and he said, "Hey, look, fellas, you're fine. You're good." I'd know I'm good.
That's pretty much it's pretty much what happened. And again, there are a lot of things to pick apart about San Diego State at this point. You watch their games. Some of these games in the Mountain West, they barely squeaked by. Air Force one of the nights, a squeaker with San Jose State, I think both times, and then another squeaker with Wyoming. So I get it. Like it's been a hard season for them to actually watch the games because they're sweating out way more games than they're used to. This is the premier program in the Mountain West Conference, a team that was in the national championship game 2 seasons ago. And they started the year kind of on the same track that they usually do, getting a couple of huge marquee wins over Houston and Creighton. And if they don't have those wins, then we're probably having a much different discussion. And they happen to have their neighbor come to town for opening night, which ended up aging wonderfully for the Aztecs, UC San Diego. So that gives them a nice mix of 3 strong non-conference victories. And then they mixed in, I think, just enough within the league. They swept Boise during the season prior to yesterday's loss. So I don't, from a San Diego State perspective in the committee, like that loss shouldn't mean that much because they've already proven twice they can beat Boise State. And if you watch the game, they just couldn't make a shot the last 4 minutes. San Diego State was up. And I think that's part of why the Aztec fans were so devastated last night. Yeah. But they have a nice collection of wins. I think they're about as solid as you can ask for on the bubble based on those wins. And they have a winning record away from home. Just they have a lot of the things that the rest of the bubble doesn't have.
Brad, your thoughts on San Diego State?
I agree with Rocco. I think they're solid. I think they will be in the NCAA tournament, barring an obscene amount of bid stealers, of course. But I think they've done what the committee has asked of teams, especially a team in the Mountain West Conference, to do. They played an unbelievable non-conference schedule. So check mark right there. Beating Houston is as good of a win as anybody has, and on the bubble, it's not even close. So when you have wins against Houston on a neutral court and Creighton on a neutral court, they don't have any quadrant 4 losses. They just have the one bad loss to UNLV at home. I think they've done enough. Their resume metrics are in the top 50, which puts them towards that 10, 11 seed, potentially last 4 in area. But I have a hard time leaving a team out who beat Houston on a neutral court when Houston is in all likelihood going to end up as a number 1 seed. I think San Diego State should be okay.
Okay. All right. That's 8 teams down. We have 4 teams to go here on Fielding the 68. When we come back, our final segment of the afternoon, Arkansas, West Virginia, Ohio State, and Vanderbilt. This is Fielding the 68, presented by Rhythm.
If you haven't heard by now, we have partnered with BetMGM for the season. We'll be using BetMGM lines to make all of our picks, and we'll have special offers for the listeners and the viewers. Download the BetMGM app and sign up using the bonus code FIELD. Deposit at least $10 and place your first wager on any game, and you'll receive up to $1,500 in bonus bets. Go download the BetMGM app and use the code FIELD today. Now is your chance to prove you're smarter than the field of 68. We're hosting a Survivor contest with our partner Splash Sports. There's a $25 entry fee, a 25 entry max in the contest, and more than 1,700 spots available, which means there's a $40,000 max prize for the winner. Survivor is the future of March Madness. Each day you pick a team to win. If they win, you advance. We'll also be running a free to enter bracket contest as well as a second chance Survivor in the Sweet 16. So prove you know more ball than the field of 68 on Splash Sports. As teams are fighting to get off the bubble and into the field of 68, I got a beverage for you that's been off the bubble since day one. Dad Water. No bubbles, no fizz, just a smooth, refreshing canned cocktail unlike anything else on the market today. If you're tired of the same old beers and seltzers on game day, crack open something different. Dad Water is made with tequila, water, and natural flavors. Nothing artificial, no BS. It's 100 calories, 0 sugar, 0 carbs, gluten-free, so if you're on a diet like me, you're good to go. Dad Water is also an Indiana brand. College hoops is in its DNA, and they want you to enjoy a great lineup of products all tournament long. Dad Water is the ultimate game time drink with no bubbles. It just drinks like water. Clean, smooth, refreshing, and without those burps. So take it from me, this is the easiest drinking adult beverage I've ever had. Dad Water is now available at Target, Total Wine and Liquor, and Meijer, as well as your favorite local liquor stores, or you can order online at drinkdadwater.com. Dad Water, tequila, water, natural flavor.
Welcome back to Fielding the 68, presented by Rhythm. Identify mid-majors and underdogs. They could upset the field and shake up your bracket. Don't wait. Download Rhythm today and transform how you bet, bracket, and enjoy college basketball. All right, the last segment of today's Fielding the 68. We are going to have one more show for all of you watching. There's going to be one more on Sunday afternoon right before the actual selection show on CBS. We will have another one here on Fielding the 68 to give you a preview of what to expect on the selection show. And we're also going to have a bracket reveal on the Field of 68 socials tomorrow as well. So be on the lookout for all of that. But as we wrap up the show here, there are 4 teams still to talk about. And the first team we're going to start with, Brad Wachtel, we're going to start with Arkansas. The Razorbacks, where do they stand as we sit here about 48 hours away now from Selection Sunday?
I think Arkansas should be fine. I think they'll be in the NCAA tournament. I actually have them as a 10 seed at the moment. The one thing that kind of stands out on their resume when you compare them to other bubble teams is they've gotten quality wins away from home. They won at Kentucky. They won at Texas. They beat Michigan on a neutral court. They won at Vanderbilt. So even though they got off to a rough start in conference play, they finished relatively strong. Other than that loss to South Carolina on the road where it seemed like they didn't show up, they did in their rematch in the SEC tournament. They were able to beat them, which I think was significant. Losing to South Carolina twice in the span of 10 days probably would not have been good heading into the NCAA tournament and Selection Sunday. But Arkansas also doesn't have any bad losses. They are 5-10 against Quadrant 1 opponents. 9-13 against Q1-2 is not particularly great. But again, when you have some of those wins, when your strong wins are away from home, it does help. So top 45 strength of record, 40 KPI. It puts them in the field, probably looking at a 10 or an 11 seed. And I don't think that they need to worry. I mean, I wouldn't call them a lock, but I think they're a team that should be in the field and save their season by the way they played the last few weeks of the season.
Rocco Miller, do you agree that Arkansas should feel pretty good about the next couple of days?
Yeah, by and large, I do. It's not my favorite resume in the world by any means, but that road win at Kentucky carries the day, and everything else is just good enough, right? I think it helps as well to have that mix of a 2-point win in the Jimmy V Classic over Michigan. That certainly aged really well at the time. It looked like Arkansas was out of the mix. I think they started SEC play 1-6, and it was looking like a steep climb to get back in it. But again, that big night at Kentucky, I know it was super hyped for Calipari's return, but it ended up being the game that really, really got them interesting. And they started playing better as a whole, as a team anyway, from that point forward, minus that ridiculous performance at South Carolina, which shows up on the team sheet as just a 19-point loss. But if you watch that game, it felt like a 40-something point loss. So I think it's just enough. They have a road Vanderbilt win they got on March 4th. That's really critical. And their overall meaningful record is right dead even, 13-13. I don't think it's going to matter too much for selection, but they did beat Lipscomb and Troy, 2 teams that won their conference tournaments. So that can't hurt. It's something they can add to the resume as, hey, we didn't just schedule teams like Texas did. We actually played some teams that can win their league. I think Arkansas has done just enough. And Brad's probably right about the seeding, probably a 10 or 11. They made it as my last 9 today, but some of that had to do with really trying to pick apart teams that belonged on the field. And I thought Arkansas was firmly in. So the way the committee will do it is they'll vote on these teams as they go through each seed line. And I think Arkansas should be in maybe on some of those earlier votes, but they can go back and scrub for seeding, and they're likely to land as a 10 or an 11.
Rocco, we'll stay with you here as we get to West Virginia. This last block of teams feels pretty cut and dry one way or the other, but West Virginia here as we wrap up the season and head into the final weekend of the season here. West Virginia, what's their case?
Well, their case is a strong one in terms of comparing them to other bubble teams, if you just go straight off the results, they're really nice to look at. They won at Kansas. I mean, that's huge. And they added Gonzaga and Arizona wins both in the Bahamas. Gonzaga, of course, aged extremely well in these last couple of weeks. Arizona is still right in the mix for a protected seed. And they have the Iowa State win at home, but at least shows they can beat a protected seed somewhere on top of those 3 wins. So those 4 wins at the top are really, really strong. I think my biggest concern about West Virginia is 2 of those wins, the Bahamas wins. DeVries was in the picture, and I have a weird feeling that possibly the committee may present this team as what are they without DeVries, and they still had some of those best wins without him too. The win at Kansas was without him, but I think they've been basically going 1-1 almost every week. I've been tracking this closely. And then they bow out and take a bad loss in the Big 12 tournament. And that made things really extra interesting because that Colorado team's 86th in the net. It turns out to be a bottom quad 2 loss. And now you look at their quad 1 and 2 record combined, they're just 10-13. And it's dicey. They get to 14-13 with their 4 wins in quad 3. And that's mainly because Robert Morris went on a crazy tear to end the year and win that league and got into quad 3 for them. But I feel like West Virginia is just going to hang on, but they could be one of the ones that would be a surprise exclusion if they basically just go off the results without DeVries. So I feel like they're a little bit of a cliffhanger still.
Brad, West Virginia?
Yeah, some really good points Rocco made. With DeVries, they did beat Gonzaga and they beat Arizona, which are obviously great wins. But I think what's important is in games he did not play. The game at Kansas, he did not play, and they won. They also beat Iowa State at home in a game he didn't play. So while they're certainly not the level of team that they may have been at the beginning of the season, I think having the ability to pick up quality wins like they did without him shows them that they are capable. So I think this is a team that should be in the field, but their seed line has definitely been dropping, by the week. Would not shock me if they ended up in Dayton. I have them right above Dayton at the moment, but their resume metrics are top 45 right now. KenPom is 53, and you start taking a look at all the teams that are at-large teams at the moment. West Virginia has the worst KenPom. So the committee uses KenPom and other predictive metrics, including net. Their net is 50 to not determine, but kind of use it as a guide for seeding, and that could definitely hurt West Virginia from a seeding aspect. But I do lean to the fact that they should be in the tournament based on getting those some quality wins with even when they weren't at full strength.
Ohio State right now is sitting at 17-15, and they don't have any more opportunities. They've already lost in the Big Ten tournament. So Ohio State at just 2 games over 500, 15 losses. That feels like a ton of losses to have accumulated to find themselves in the field on Sunday. Brad, do you think the Buckeyes still have a discussion there, or do you think they're on the outside looking in?
I mean, they will definitely be in the discussion. I don't think that they will get in. It's rare enough that when seeing a team getting an at-large bid by being only 2 games over 500, it doesn't happen often. It's happened maybe once. Georgia did it 24 years ago. So it's rare, and obviously the times have changed. There are more teams in the field and all that. But, you take a look at Ohio State's resume. They're 9-15 against Q1 and 2, which is no good. 58 strength of record, which is worse than all these other bubble teams that we've already discussed. And while they do have that win at Purdue, I know Rocco mentioned it last show, that win at Purdue, while it's still a good win, it's not nearly as good as it was when Purdue was a number 2 seed. Beating Kentucky on a neutral court, also a good win. Other than that, their wins came at home. They beat Texas on a neutral court, which is solid. But when you have that many losses, I think you need some more quality on their on in their win category to catapult them, and I don't think it's enough to justify putting them into the field.
Rocco, Ohio State.
Yeah, pretty much right there with Brad. I think, just some other points are these guys, Ohio State lost 6 times at home. I can't remember. I'm sure I'm wrong, but I don't remember ever a team losing 6 home games and not getting in. You got to protect your home court at least a little bit. You can understand a couple slip ups, but and the other part of that is they lost at home to Northwestern and Pittsburgh, 2 teams that are nowhere near the field. So that hurts tremendously bad. And then we can get into the 15 losses too, which Brad covered well. I would just say 6 of those 17 wins came in quadrant 4, and they're not really doing anything for them. So their effective record has and continues to be the problem. At 11-15, there's really just no, from where I'm sitting, there's no appetite for this resume.
All right, last team to talk about, and they feel pretty safely in the field for now, so I'll pitch it back to you guys before we do have one final to wrap up the show. But quickly here, before we get out of here, Vanderbilt, they feel safely in. Is there any chance they get left out on Sunday, or are they just right now just waiting to hear what seed they are, Rocco?
This is a really interesting question. I will say yes, there's risk. I'm just trying to figure out how much. Because Vanderbilt has that nasty 331 non-conference strength of schedule, by far the worst, and seriously so far out of bounds that this is the type of team like Clemson found out in recent years, a couple of years ago, Wake Forest found out in recent years. If you're this poor in the non-conference strength of schedule and you're close to the cut line, they have every reason in the world to leave you out. So now the question becomes, how close is Vanderbilt to the cut line? And I'm seeing various things across the many forecasts that are out there. But my own forecast, I've kept them up in that 10 seed range. I think that would be just enough teams clear of the cut. But again, if we get bid stealers and then we start replacing those bid stealers and the rest of the bubble falls down, Vanderbilt's going to fall with them in terms of the at-large pool. If they're, we take 37 total at-large teams, Paul. And so if they end up somewhere between 33 and 37 on that list, and you have all these other good options, there's a really good chance the committee could just go ahead and rip Vanderbilt out instead of somebody else that we've already discussed. So I think the other thing is, the thing you like about Vanderbilt is they beat 8 different SEC teams during the season before losing to Texas in the SEC tournament. And the road win at Texas A&M really carries it all for them because that without that, they were in a lot of trouble. They only went 3-7 in true road games all year. The other 2 wins were LSU and Virginia Tech. So it's not a great road resume, but at least the one at the top has a lot of punch. And I think it's just good enough to keep Vanderbilt safe from being ripped out, but just be careful because a couple bids get stolen. This will be a prime candidate for getting ripped out of the field.
Brad, any final thoughts here on Vanderbilt?
I agree with Rocco. I think if Vanderbilt did not win that game at Texas A&M, they would be out because the rest of their big wins came at home, which isn't good enough. And you paired that with their non-conference strength of schedule, which is awful. I think that would have been a recipe for disaster, and they would have been out. But for now, they are in. I think they should be in. Another candidate for Dayton. I have them as part of my last 4 in at the top of those 4. So I think they're right there between a 10 and 11 seed. But another team that wouldn't shock me if they ended up in Dayton.
Okay, to close the show here, since this game just went final, Tennessee beats Texas. Either one of you can take this. Now that we have the result, Texas's season, or at least their regular season and conference tournament, is over as they head into Selection Sunday. Any final thoughts on Texas now that we know they have lost to Tennessee?
Yeah, 12-15 effective record, NIT for Texas.
Yeah. Yeah, so for me, I think they're still right in play. I think we got to see these other results that happen over the next few hours. Not particularly envious of their position right now. And I lean towards them being out after this loss.
Brad, Rocco, you tried to get rid of me the other day, and then here we are. One more day here on Friday afternoon. I'm not going away. I'm sticking around. Friday afternoon, a good bracketology session here as we head into the weekend. And this Friday night, so I'm going to get off here. I'm going to walk right across the street, go to Madison Square Garden. We have Marquette and St. John's tipping off in 25 minutes. Illinois and Maryland's also at 6:30. Duke UNC, BYU Houston, Mizzou and Florida, UConn and Creighton's later. We have the Mountain West later. We have Arizona and Texas Tech, Kentucky and Bama. This is setting up to be an all-time kind of night for the sport that we love. It's great to talk bracketology with you guys. I will not be on the show with you on Sunday, so enjoy the selection show, both of you. Thanks for a great Fielding the 68. You will both be back. I believe it's both of you. If not, I don't mean to speak for you, but I believe it's the two of you on Sunday. So enjoy the rest of your weekend. Everybody that's watching and listening, this has been Fielding the 68 presented by Rhythm. For Rocco Miller, for Brad Wachtel, I'm Paul Fritschner. Thank you so much for watching and listening, everybody. Enjoy the hoops. It's great. Enjoy.